Tell me about the Azelle Rodney situation.
So Azelle Rodney was part of an organised crime group. They'd done business with a couple of Colombian drug dealers. We're following at a discreet distance. Voice on the radio which goes, right, attack, attack, attack. It was probably the most difficult call I've ever had to make. Anyway, I decided I had to make it. I fired a series of shots. He's dead.
When did it occur to you that you were going to end up in a 10-year court case? What were the press calling you at that time?
The Equaliser, the Metzone serial killer. Got all the photographers running up alongside and trying to take pictures through the window.
What was going through your head at that moment?
Mate, I was like, what the fuck is going on here?
After all of these years, do you have any one regret? Tony, welcome to the show, mate.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, and you too. Let's roll all the way back. Where did you grow up and how did you become London's Met's top firearm officer?
I'm not sure I was the top, but going back, I'm a South Coast boy. I was brought up between Bognor Regis and LA, or Little Hampton. As it's known. Yeah. My best jokes, and you stole it before I got it out. I was brought up on a 1960s Heidi High holiday camp. My mum was the secretary and my dad was the bar manager. I was born on a holiday camp up in Suffolk, and as a baby moved out of this holiday camp. I was privately educated, so I'm sort of a posh kid, but not really. So I went to boarding school at the age of 7 in Sussex. Left at the age of 17 because I wasn't going to get any more qualifications. Been brought up on a diet of war magazines and war films and cop films and 1970s cops, in New York chasing bad guys over rooftops with guns and getting in car chases. And I thought, that sounds pretty exciting. And I certainly wasn't going to join the police and patrol the seafront in Bognor Regis. So I ended up going to the smoke.
Did you?
And joining the Met.
So where did you go? When you joined the Met up in, what part of London did you join?
Well, obviously I went to Hendon, which is northwest London, which is, in those days, everybody went through recruit training at Hendon. And then I got posted to Lewisham. Okay. In southeast London. Okay. Which is a good learning.
That's straight in the deep end, isn't it?
Yeah, straight from Little Hampton to Lewisham.
What was it? How old were you when you were training up in Hendon?
I was 18 and a half and I was already a welfare case because me and my mate had this deal down in a holiday camp that we only dated girls that were there for a week on holiday or 2 weeks max. Never go with the staff because they were there for the whole season. So I'd left school, I'd gone to work at the camp doing like maintenance and stuff on the build up to the summer season. And then all the first part of the summer season was old age pensioners. And they were used as a sort of a test bed to make sure everybody was, the kitchen was working properly and all that sort of stuff. So there were no kids my age except the waitresses. I ended up making one of them pregnant. They never told me about contraception at all boys boarding school. And so halfway through training school, I ended up having to get married, literally halfway through. Went away for the weekend, came back married at 18 and a half. And the funny thing was, my father-in-law wasn't at the wedding. And the reason that he wasn't in the wedding was because he was in prison. So
what was he banged up for?
Receiving a lorry load of stolen lorry tyres. He'd been nicked by the regional crime squad. And I knew this because my wife-to-be had told me. But I got called up to see the commandant at Hendon. And I thought it was about my married quarters because, like I said, I was being treated as a bit of a welfare case. And he said, is there anything you'd like to tell me about your future father-in-law? And I no, sir. He said, well, perhaps you'd like to read this. And he hands me a letter and I look at it and it's got from, prisoner 4629 at Stafford Prison, asks for day release to go to the wedding of his daughter, Kim, to police constable Anthony Long and the Metropolitan Police. So obviously I denied it.
Did he get let out for the day?
No, he didn't. No,
he didn't.
No, the first time I met him, I shit myself because he was like a big old bruiser. Yeah. Bit of a gypsy, bare knuckle fighter, the kindest, gentlest person you ever met, and he was a really good artist, and I'm quite good at art, so we hit it off straight away. But I remember the first time I met him, I was proper bottling it, and I went up to get some drinks at the bar and came back, tripped and spilt beer all over.
That's a good start.
A good start to the relationship. But no, he was all right. Yeah.
Was he sound as a pan with you, knowing you were going to be a copper and everything?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah,
well, I mean, I was already a copper by the time we first met.
He was okay.
Yeah, he was. I mean,
because sometimes old school back in the 70s, 80s can be a bit older. I mean, I don't want a copper in the family. And
do you know what? He was absolutely fine with it, but I had to. The only thing was that I had to tolerate him telling me that he was innocent. He'd been fitted up by the regional crime squad. Literally every time I saw him.
How long did he get? Roughly, can you remember?
I don't know, to be honest.
No,
I don't know. It certainly wasn't his first offence.
Yeah,
you know. But
he was at it earning £1 note.
Well,
fair play to him.
He said he was innocent. And, what? I don't know. I mean, back in the day, it might well just be that he was a bit of a face, and his time had run up, and it was his turn to get nicked. I don't know, but it was a whole lorry load of
what was the movement for you then when you went there? When was the first time you said, you know what, I actually want to go in this department?
What, firearms?
Yes.
So, like I said, I was brought up in Sussex, and I've told you what my interests were. So I always had guns.
Yeah.
I always had air pistols and air rifles, and probably before legally you should have done, but mind you, this was back in the 70s, so maybe not. And there was plenty of places, certainly in the winter, go down on the beach and shoot, go to the woods and shoot and stuff like that. So I'd always been interested in guns, and I was a bit of a student, I suppose, of firearms. And so as soon as I was legally able to get what are called a Section 1 firearms certificate, or a shotgun certificate first, and then a Section 1 firearms, which back in the day were pistols and rifles. I joined a rifle club in Chichester, and I found that I was actually quite a natural pistol shot, and started winning competitions and things like that. So when I joined the Met and I was given married quarters, I had a safe in my married quarters, and I brought my guns up from Sussex, and carried on doing sport shooting, really. Getting a firearms course was pretty limited back then, certainly if you look 12 and a half, which is what I did. And so I didn't get a shots course when I was a regular copper. I eventually went on a unit called the Special Patrol Group, the SPG, where pretty much everyone on the unit were trained in firearms. You didn't have to; it wasn't a requirement to be on the SPG, but most guys did do a course. And I did a course. Nowadays, I think an initial basic firearms course just to carry a gun is about 8 weeks. Right. Back then, it was 5.
Okay.
5 days.
5 days was it?
5 days on an indoor range.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're a good shot, off you go, get in there.
Yeah. Well,
is that basically what it was?
They weren't all good shots, but
no, I'm saying if you were a good shot, you would then get in.
So yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Okay.
So I went on my basic firearms course, and I got pinged as being above, standard, and encouraged to become a firearms instructor.
Yeah.
So I did the firearms instructors course, and back then, the unit was called D11. D department was training, so D11 was a training department predominantly. But in 1975, as a result of all the international terrorism, the SAS had just a year or so previously been given their counter-terrorist role, and the Met were told, you need to have a unit that's able to hold the fort until such time as the cavalry arrive, i.e. the SAS. Yeah. And they went, we're very proud of being an unarmed police force. We don't want to create an armed counter-terrorist team. Well, let's give it to the instructors because they're all good shots. Right, okay. And
so you were one of the originals.
I wasn't one of the originals because the firearms unit was first formed in 1968. 1967, the previous year, 3 Met officers had been shot dead by a guy called Harry Roberts.
Harry Roberts, yeah.
The gang that he was with.
Yeah.
And so that was when it was established that up to that point there was no formal firearms training. It was literally a case of, you used to be in the army, didn't you? Yeah. Right, here's a revolver, go and look for that bank robber.
Yeah.
And there was no real formal training as such. So in 1968 or 67, after what we call the Foxtrot 1-1 shootings,
Foxtrot 1-1 shootings, what's that?
Foxtrot 1-1 was the call sign of the unarmed Q car. Not the unarmed Q car, the unmarked Q car.
Yeah.
That the 3 officers were in that stopped Harry Roberts and his crew in their car. Their call sign was Foxtrot 1-1, and it became known as the Foxtrot 1-1 shootings. So the firearms training unit was formed in 68, and their job was to train. There's something like 5,000 regular bobbies and detectives and people like that needed to carry a firearm. And like I said, in 1975, they were given officially like a formal operational role, to be a SWAT team, for want of a better word. So I actually joined it in '83.
Yeah.
So about 9 years after they'd been given, 8 or 9 years after they'd been given that operational role. But it was still very much in its infancy. You know? You're probably too young to remember a TV show called Dixon and Doc Green, but you may have heard of it. Have you heard of Dixon and Doc Green?
No.
So back in the 1950s, there was a film made called The Blue Lamp. And the Metropolitan Police lent an awful lot of support to the making of this film. It was a typical, West London studio, black and white film, and it followed the story of a guy who was an experienced old sweat PC teaching a new lad the ropes. And he was as straight as he was a laser beam. This bloke, he was so straight, he was absolutely incorruptible. You know, he's smart in his uniform with his medal ribbons up, and he walked around the beat with his hands behind his back. You know.
Walking 10 to 2.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, and in the end, he got shot.
Okay.
And this was a film as opposed to a TV show, but it became such a popular film, and the Met had lent their support to it because, to be honest, the Met were going through a period in the sort of 50s, pretty much like they're going through now. They couldn't do right for doing wrong. There had been undoubtedly some corruption. They didn't have a very good reputation, and what this film did is it basically painted this image of what the Met wanted Londoners to think their police force was, and then it was so successful they then, as a spin-off, they made a TV show where Dixon and Doc Green got brought back from death, from the grave, and he became this character, and it went from like 1950 something right the way through until the 70s. I mean, it was probably the most popular TV show, or one of the most popular TV shows. And like I said, it gave this image, and most of the image was around the fact that, you know, the Met Police don't carry guns, or British police don't carry guns. And it painted this image that was totally false, really, because obviously we did carry guns, and we weren't whiter than white, you know. But that was the image that they wanted to portray, to such an extent that they sort of buried their heads in the sand in relation to the real use of firearms. And sort of, well, we don't want to talk about that. You know, senior officers were like, hide away. So you weren't allowed to use the word gun on the radio, police radio. You know, if you needed urgent assistance, you needed police to come with firearms because you were getting shot at. You used to, I need units here, and they need to bring equipment.
Right, okay.
If you said the word gun on the radio, like the inspector would drag you in his office.
Why?
Well, because they just didn't want the public to know that we had guns.
That you were carrying.
Yeah,
okay.
It was just ridiculous. You had holsters, but you had to carry them in your pocket. So they couldn't be seen.
What was the law back then when all the bank robberies were going on in the 80s? Massive.
What
was the law?
70s,
80s. Yeah. Massive going in there, banging out money from every bank and every courier, whatever was going on. What was the law back then for you guys to prevent this happening?
Well, really, the only people that were doing anything proactively were the Sweeney, the flying squad. Yeah. And like I said, you know, one of the things that encouraged me to join the Met was like TV shows and films and exciting police work. And really what did the deal for me and made me sign up on the dotted line was the Sweeney came out.
Right, perfect time.
Perfect time.
Yeah. That's what I want.
Yeah, Ford Granada, long hair, 2-inch revolver, again,
tash, big old handlebar tash.
Sadly, I couldn't grow. I couldn't grow until I was about 40. But yeah, so that to me was what I joined to do. And you know, as a ordinary regular uniform copper, you'd know there were bank robberies happening because you'd be responding to them. Normally, it was like Thursday or Fridays, which was payslip day, because everything was cash then.
Yeah.
So, you know, people who worked in factories got paid their money in an envelope, and the security van would have to deliver that. So anywhere where there was going to be lots of cash would get robbed. As I was joining in the 70s, it was banks. But quite quickly, they stopped robbing banks because banks upped their security.
Yeah.
And started putting screens in. Before that, you could just hop across the counter and...
Bit of glass.
Yeah, that. Yeah. So that became more difficult to do. So then they started doing cash in transit, so security vans, and then the security van companies would slowly but surely keep adding bits and pieces, airlock systems and all the rest of it, until it became too difficult to do that, you know. And so they'd have to change the way they went about doing it. But the flying squad were responsible for investigating and proactively dealing with armed robbers, but they kept it very much to themselves. So a certain amount of flying squad officers. That every officer would be trained in the use of firearms. If you didn't have a gun, you have a pickaxe helve or a baseball bat. Literally.
Right, okay.
And
what, in the back of the car?
In the back of the car.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
given to you, or you bring it yourself?
I think they were issued bizarrely.
They were issued,
pickaxe
okay.
helves.
Pickaxe.
Can you imagine it?
Baseball bats.
Baseball bats, yeah. And so they go out on jobs, and detectives were always a little bit too cool for school.
Yeah.
You know, they weren't interested in doing tactics. You know, D11, the firearms training wing, was saying you should stand back, get behind cover, challenge with a good shout of "Armed police, put the gun down." But these were experienced street coppers, and they knew that if you did that and you were 12 yards away from the bad guy, the bad guy's going to have a 12 yards head start on you when he legs it. So they would just swarm out of their hiding places with their pickaxe elves and their guns and bash them up, basically. Yeah. They used to call it a bash up. Yeah. So you were aware of that as a uniform officer, but you didn't really have any involvement in it. And at that time, D11, which was the nearest the Met had to a SWAT team, wasn't doing it either. The flying squad would keep it. They were very secretive because it was all based on informants. They knew that robbery was going to take place because an informant had given them the intelligence to put together a plan. And there was a good chance that the informant was actually part of the robbery team, and you're going to have to let him leg it and escape.
Is that right?
Yeah. So, all this stuff.
So there's a grass, in-house grass.
Honour amongst thieves. It's rubbish.
Yeah.
It's nonsense. They were all grass.
Have the old Bill of the police ever bung people like that? You saying you got an informant for him to speak?
There was an informant's fund. Absolutely.
There's an informant's fund.
Yeah.
That you would give him 10 grand or 5 grand, or back in the day maybe a grand, to say, give us the heads up on that. And
and of course, there might have been a chance that the detectives that were it's all changed now, but back then, you were judged on your ability as a young copper, if you wanted to get in the CID in particular, on informants. So my surname's Long. When I first went to Lewisham, my nickname amongst the local kids, especially the black kids, was like schoolboy. Yeah, schoolboy. And I had to like buff up my chest and pretend I didn't look 12. And eventually, I became quite. Back then, there was a term. You still hear it occasionally now, but the term was thief taker, and it was almost a sort of a term of honour. If you got called a thief taker, it meant that you were a good copper and you were proactive, and that probably meant you had informants. And then I only did 5 years street duty at Lewisham. Period of that was as with a view to being a detective on the crime squad, working in plain clothes. But my nickname changed from schoolboy to long grass because the local villains thought that I had loads of grasses working for me.
In your pocket?
Yeah, in fact I didn't. I used to play mind games with them. So you'd stop some little shitbag and you go, well, you had a bit of a result the other night. And they'd be like, what are we talking about? Oh, well, that burglary down the high street, all the fur coats. That was you, wasn't it? And I'd like grin and wink, and don't fucking tell me that, And so you'd give them a little clue, like subtly, and they'd go, fucking that so-and-so told you that. Well, he did this, and they'd all grass on each other, And so I had but a lot of the people that, I had weren't registered informants. In fact, I don't think I ever had a registered informant. My informants were people like a mum who was concerned that her teenage daughter was hanging around with little toe rags. And then she found a stash of letters that these kids were sending from remand home while they were waiting for trial for burglary or whatever it might be. And she'd let me read the letters. Right. And I'd get to know the nicknames, and I'd get to know who was hanging with who. And it's like a big puzzle. You put it together. But if you had registered informants, that meant that you actually registered his name, and you were then eligible to get him money for any information that
officially
bore fruit. So if he told you there was going to be a burglary, and these were the guys that were going to do it, and this is the vehicle they had and where it was hidden and everything else, and you put together an operation and succeeded in arresting them, he got some payment for the fund.
So you'd have done that for pure wedge. You'd have done that for pure money rather than getting off, saying, well, you're going to get 3 years for this. If you give me the heads up on that, I'll reduce that to 6 months.
All of that. All of that. And, so you might have someone say there was the getaway driver, so he wasn't carrying a shooter on the plot, but he'd be allowed to leg it. Now, the detectives knew that, but they didn't want to use plods,
Yeah.
like me, or like like D11, because we were all, we were uniform blokes, and so they'd keep it all to themselves. And so we didn't actually start getting involved in armed robbery plots until probably the late 80s.
Okay.
And when we did, we started shooting people because that's what we were trained to do. A lot of the detectives, it's a different story for a detective. So, for instance, let's say you're following, I don't know, Joe Schmo, armed robber. Well, when you're putting the case together, you're doing a lot of surveillance on him, and a lot of that surveillance is, what do they call it, lifestyle surveillance. Yeah. So you basically want to know where he's going, who he's meeting, and all the rest of it. It's not you're following him to watch him do a robbery. Yeah. You're following him to build up an image of his lifestyle. Yeah. So you followed him with his kids down at school and seen him drop his kids off at school and pick them up. Yeah. And so he's a real person to you. And so even if you do find yourself with a gun in the hand and you catch him on the plot wearing a balaclava and carrying a gun, there's a sort of an inbuilt human, barrier, if you like, from actually shooting him. Whereas to us, he was just a face on a briefing sheet. And if we caught him on the plot with a gun, and we were much more confident in the use of firearms, that's what we trained to do. Yeah. So it wasn't that we were deliberately shooting people or going out of our way to shoot people. If we shouted armed police and they dropped their guns, then they didn't get shot. But they'd have to drop them pretty quickly. Yeah.
How quickly are you thinking, he's got a shooter, I've got a shooter, he's going to shoot me or I'm going to shoot him? How quickly you got to think? This is like half a second stuff, right? Second stuff.
Yeah, so when I was, most of my career as a firearms officer, I was also an instructor. So what I used to teach to people which was my policy, the way not policy, but the way that I dealt with it was, if someone's got a gun in their hand or a knife in their hand, I can shoot them. I can shoot them now if I want to, and I can justify shooting them. Yeah. So having made that decision, now why shouldn't I shoot them? Yeah, do you get it? Do you get what I'm saying? Yeah, so it's like, right, but he's the gun's pointing muzzle down or whatever. But I've made that decision to shoot him. So if he just even so much as starts to bring that gun up, I'm going to shoot him. Okay. A lot of coppers work on the premise like, oh, he's got a shotgun, but it's pointing at the floor, so I can't shoot him. But the time it takes for him to bring that shotgun from there to there is fractions of a second, and action will always beat reaction. So unless you've already
action will always beat reaction. That's half a second quicker than you.
So if you haven't made that decision that if he twitches, he's fucking shot, then you are behind the curve, and you're not going to get your shots off.
So your mindset is, I'm going to shoot him.
Well, no.
As long as he keeps his gun down.
I can shoot him. Yeah. Why shouldn't I shoot him?
Why shouldn't I? Okay. As long as you keep your gun down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's kind of my take.
What was that feeling like on your first shot? How many people have you shot?
5.
5 people.
Yeah.
Do you remember your first shot?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Where were you?
My first incident was, so I'd been in the department. I joined 83, so it's 2 years after I was in the department. It was Boxing Day 1985, and we got called out from home for a domestic siege that had been going on for nearly 24 hours. So our standby team had been there, and we got a call at home. So in those days, of course, no mobile phones, you had pagers. So the only people that had pagers was the standby team. So when you took over that role, you'd pick up your gas-powered pager, and if it beeps, you get into work. Yeah. So I got a phone call at home, like Christmas Day, saying, I don't know if you've been watching the telly, Tom, but there's this siege going on. I said, yeah, I've been watching it. They said, well, we're trying to put together a scratch team. Are you available tomorrow if we need you? And I said, yeah, give us a call. Yeah. And it was my son's third birthday on Boxing Day. Yeah. And my missus was listening to the phone call, and she's like, what? You just agreed to go into work? Fucking what? Yeah. So don't worry about it. I said, it'll all be
blow over.
It'll be stood down by the attention. Of course it didn't. So I got up early in the morning. Me and my mate went into work together. This is shared lifts at the time. And we discussed, we'd almost had a briefing because we'd seen what was going on the screen, on the television. And every time the negotiators went forward to talk to the suspect through the broken kitchen window, our team would come up on either side of the window so that they couldn't be seen by the suspect. But they'd have sledgehammers and they'd have their guns out and all the rest of it, and the stun grenades ready to go in case it all went tits up. And so we went, all right, okay. So we kind of had this briefing. But occasionally he'd come out on the balcony on his own, this bloke. And I remember my mate saying to me, we should take a baton gun. Because baton gun had just come into service, but it was meant for riots, and it was only actually authorised for public order use. And it's a 37mm round, so it's about that big, about that long. It's the thing that they were firing in Northern Ireland, plastic bullets. After the riots in the early 80s, it was authorised for use on the mainland UK. And we thought, well, if he comes out on the balcony, shoot him with that. And that will distract him, and we can grab hold of him before he gets back into the flat where this little girl was being held hostage, this little 4-year-old girl was being
And where
held
was
hostage.
this in London?
Northolt.
Northolt,
So
okay.
over by Heathrow
Okay,
Airport.
I know, yeah.
So, anyway, and we get to the base, and one of our inspectors is there, and he's going to be in charge of us. And we said, boss, we've just been talking about it on the way in. Get it back and go, nope, it's only authorised for public order use, can't use it. So we said, well, yeah, but, no buts. So, right, okay, so that was one option out the window. And then we got down there, we got briefed by the team, and they said, oh, yeah, we moved forward. So we've been going backwards and forwards so often, we've left the sledgehammers on either side of the window. So if you get called for with there's a sledgehammer waiting for you there, So just after we arrived, a new set of negotiators came on, and they didn't want us anywhere near it. They were convinced that the reason he wouldn't surrender is because he knew that we were out there with guns and that we were going to shoot him as soon as he came out. And so we just got pushed to the sidelines. Yeah, well, we don't want the suspect to see you. So at one point they called forward his wife, who he tried to grab at knife point the day before when the negotiators had sent her forward, which is a complete no-no anyway, to get like a member of the family or someone involved in. And at one point he sent her forward on the balcony again, and he goes, they're going to attack me. And she goes, no, they're not. They're not going to attack you. They promised me they won't. Well, what's that sledgehammer doing? Throw that sledgehammer over the balcony. So the girl goes, picks the sledgehammer up, drops it over the balcony. Well, there were firemen downstairs with a blanket ready to catch the girl if he dropped the little girl over the balcony. Nearly took out a fireman. It missed him by about that much. So the whole thing was the on-scene commander was so desperate that it wasn't going to be resolved by the use of firearms. That he gave an order: guns aren't to be seen. It's like I said, it was this Dixon and Doc Green sort of mentality. Anyway, long story short, wires got crossed. The suspect came out on the balcony. People at one end of the balcony thought he was making a break for it because he had a knife, the big kitchen knife in his hand. Thought he was going to try and fight his way past us and get down the stairs and away. So they broke cover. But in point of fact, he wasn't. He sprinted along the balcony to grab hold of a riot shield that had been abandoned at the beginning of it, to drag this riot shield back into his flat to help him build his defences up. And he managed to get back in the flat before the team, so they came face to face. The lead guy had the riot shield thrown at him, and he was in, and that was it. We were committed then. And it was purely down to a lack of coordination, poor management, and everything else. So we ended up throwing stun grenades in. I clambered through the window, the kitchen window, and he'd made the kitchen into a bit of an obstacle course. He'd pulled the fridge over onto its side and the washing machine, so I had to clamber all over that. The smoke from our stun grenades basically meant I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. And turned out he'd also wired the fridge up to the electrics, thinking that we'd get electrocuted, but for whatever reason, I don't know, that didn't happen. And I found my way into the living room, and he was using this little 4-year-old kid as a shield. The lighting was really poor, the curtains were pulled, and it was just starting to get dark. It was sort of late afternoon, and I shouted at him. I think I called him a C word or something similar. I dropped the knife or whatever. I was just angry, to be honest. It's just like this poor little kid. She'd been treated like a rag doll for 2 days.
Was it his kid?
No, it wasn't. And
okay.
the press kind of got confused about this. It wasn't his kid at all. Basically, his wife had left him because going back to what you were saying, he was an armed robber, And him and his little crew, all West Indian guys, had all been nicked, and he turned Queen's evidence, grassed all his mates up for a lesser sentence.
Yeah.
So he got a lesser sentence, and that sentence was in protective custody. So instead of going to prison and going on a wing, he spent it in a closed down police station where he had the whole cell passage to himself. He had a little gym in one cell, he had a TV, he had conjugal right visits, and after a relatively short period of time he was released back into the world, went back to his wife, and started beating up on her and raping her. So his wife tried to report this to the police. The police were like, well, it's domestic, because back then, I mean, nowadays you know how conscious we are of domestic violence. Back then it was like, oh, it's another woman, you know, there's no point taking her into court because she'll say she loves him and all that. So nothing got done. So eventually she takes a kid and she goes to her half sister, whose flat this was. Got a woman called Jackie Charles, and she had a daughter the same age. So anyway, he turns up Christmas Day, demanding to see his kid. His wife runs next door to use the phone. Obviously no mobile. She's run next door to use the phone. He's forced his way in the flat, tries to take the kid, and Jackie Charles tries to stop him, and he stabbed her 14 times.
My God.
She had like defensive wounds all over.
So when you went in there, then going back to where we were, when you went in there and you were like, right, calling in the C-bomb, down to, what was the next movement for you? Like, you go back a minute ago, you're saying, right, it's either me or him.
He had this knife, and I could see the knife glinting.
Yeah.
And like I said, this little girl was across him. They were both, black.
Yeah.
And literally, all I could see were their eyes and their teeth, and it was really hard to make out where her body ended and his began.
Yeah.
But I could see his shoulder. There was a sort of beam of light on his shoulder, and so I just fired a pair of shots at his shoulder. He didn't drop the knife. And to this day, I say this every time I do an interview like this, and I wrote about it in the book, I can't honestly tell you whether I fired my shots immediately before he stabbed the little girl, as he stabbed the little girl, or after he stabbed the little girl. It all happened.
So he stabbed the little girl?
He stabbed her. He stabbed, it's the same knife that he killed the Jackie Charles with. And he stabbed one of the stab wounds. He'd already slashed the little girl in front of the negotiators. A day before, right down to the bone. So she already had a bandage. I'd say a bandage. It was a bit of old rag tied around her wrist, around her arm.
So did you knock him? Do you knock him down?
No. So what happened? Bearing in mind, he's sitting on a couch. He's sort of he's in the corner of a settee with a little girl across him.
Yeah.
And so I fired 2 shots instinctively because I came up. I tried to use my sights because that sort of we used to do what we call instinctive shooting or sense of direction shooting, where you keep both eyes open and you focus on the threat, and you just punch the gun out in the same way that I'm pointing my finger at you now. And it's a great technique for close quarter shooting, provided you've got a big target, like it's just one person on their own. But with a hostage, you really don't want to be doing that. You want to use the sights so you can get pinpoint accuracy. But I brought my gun up, and of course it's dark. I can't see my sights, so I fired a pair of shots instinctively at the furthest part of his body away from the little girl. One of those rounds, so the knife was up like that, so one of the rounds went through the muscle here, and the other one went through his clothing, so I only hit him with one of the two rounds that I'd fired. But what happened then is he instinctively sort of closed his eyes and went into a ball, at which point the flash from my gun had silhouetted my sights, and 2, he'd exposed his temple to me, so I fired a deliberate aim shot at his temple, and I just saw I didn't know whether I'd hit him. I thought I had, because his eyes kind of rolled up into his head like the classic movie, eyes up to the top of his head, and then he just slumped. And I thought, okay, now he asked me what I thought, well, I fucking killed him. Now the unit was created, as I said earlier, in about 68. We were given the full operational role in 75. It's now 85, and we've not fired a shot in anger. We've been out on like probably a couple of 100 jobs in that decade, but never had to fire a shot. And in point of fact, we were so proud of that role. The older guys in the unit and the bosses of the unit were so proud that we'd resolved every incident we'd ever dealt with by, softly, catchy monkey, negotiation, that we would never fire a shot, and if we did fire a shot, the boat that did it would be directing traffic in Lewisham High Street the next day, because you would have fucked up their perfect reputation. So the first thing that went through my head is, well, you've fucking done it now, mate. You've actually done what you've been training to do. And so...
Was there any knock-on effects? Was there any knock-on effects? When you kill someone, what are the knock-on effects?
I didn't kill him.
Oh, you didn't kill him?
No, I was going to come to that.
Okay.
So what happened was, and this is a theme through every shooting I've been involved in, I don't know whether it's guilt or whatever, but I thought I'd killed him. So fucking I've killed a bloke. So it's like, well, what do you do? Well, make yourself busy. So the first thing I did was grab hold of the little girl, and the knife was sticking out of her. And you're always taught with knife wounds to leave the knife in situ, not take it. So I sort of took hold of the knife to stabilise her, but she just slumped, her body weight just slumped, and the knife just came out. So I dropped it on the floor. I picked a shell dressing. I didn't take the shell dressing out of its wrapping. I just literally just stuck it where the knife had been, picked her up, and took her out of the building. I couldn't get out of the building straight away because he'd put a load of barriers up against the door. So it's just as well we went through the windows. But eventually those barriers were withdrawn. I got out on the balcony. There was still blood on the balcony, and it had been raining all day, so it was really slippery, so I was really conscious of that. And I ran down the stairs and ran past the negotiators, who were just looking at me like, what have you done, sort of thing. Handed the little girl over to the ambulance crew, who literally just, there was no paramedics in those days, literally just shoved her in the back of the ambulance and drove out. I helped get the ambulance through the crowd because there was an angry crowd, predominantly black. They weren't angry for what I'd done because they'd been baying for this bloke's blood, because he'd killed a black woman and he was holding a little black girl hostage. They wanted him dealt with, and they were angry because it appeared that the police weren't doing anything. So I helped clear the path for the ambulance to get out, and then I realised I still had my gun in my hand. And so I tucked the gun in my jacket and went upstairs. And when the team came in, a couple of minutes later, because we'd taken over another flat down the balcony as our control room, and I thought, right, make yourself busy. So I was making them brews and making.
So you're making yourself busy to get this off, get something else off the mind.
To keep it off the mind. Absolutely that. And the team all came in, and it was a bit bizarre really, because man hugs weren't really a thing in the 80s, but just blokes were like, oh fucking hell, mate, you know. And someone said something, and I said, well, I don't worry about it. He's fucking dead, isn't he? He says, no, he's not.
Right.
He, as soon as you left the room, his eyes popped open, and he said, finish us off.
Yeah.
And so he stood trial in a wheelchair. I got called to the Old Bailey to give evidence, like however many months later, 8 months, 9 months later. I got commendation for the judge, and I think I got a commissioner's commendation for bravery as well. But I was never suspended from duty though. I was the first person to do it. They didn't know what to do with me, so I literally went when I went back to work after Christmas. I went and saw the armourer and went, I need a new revolver. They issued me a new revolver, and I was back on the ops team. So back then they really didn't know what to do with me, and I just went back to our usual cycle of 3 weeks training, 1 week ops, ad infinitum sort of thing.
Tell me about the Azelle Rodney situation. We're moving on here to 2005. What happened that day? What was the surveillance? What was going through your mind?
So we'd done the job the day before, and it was, so I should say, we talked about the previous jobs. I don't know how many operations we would do in a year then, but we were really just in our infancy in terms of being used by proactive squads like the Flying Squad, like the Regional Crime Squad, starting to do this thing. Then we had all the drugs and bits and pieces. So all of my shootings basically reflect sort of criminal activity. So we've gone from or the progression from the department from like domestic siege to a pre-planned robbery plot, and then to drugs and drug importation and all the rest of it. So Azelle Rodney was part of an organised crime group based in sort of West London, sort of Neasden and places like that, predominantly Afro-Caribbean, but there was some white criminals in amongst them, and there was also a handful of South American, like Hispanic, and their primary job was drug distribution, but a lot of the drugs that they were selling, they were ripping off from other drug dealers, basically, and
robbing other drug dealers.
So they done business with a couple of Colombian drug dealers that were based in Edgware on previous occasions. They'd gone there, they'd laid down the money, they'd taken crack cocaine or whatever it was they were doing. I think they were stealing cocaine, and they had little crack factories. They would turn it into crack. And the last time they'd done it, the guy that had done the buy sort of came back and went, they're rich for the taking. They've got no protection at all. They're very trusting. I'd have robbed them with a knife if I'd had a knife with me. So the information was that it was like we had a Photoshop of about 20 odd photographs. It'll be like, this guy will almost certainly be on the plot, but as for the other guys, it could be any one of these. And it's probably going to be between 3 and 4 of them. We don't know exactly where in Edgware these victims, these drug dealing victims, live, but what we do know is it's somewhere near Edgware Underground Station. But that's all we know, and it's a flat. That's all we know. So we can't afford to let this robbery take place, because if they kill the Colombian drug dealers, and let's be honest, if you've done deals with these guys before, you're not going to leave them alive. It would just be suicide. So, our intelligence suggests that they're going to rob and then kill. And they're probably not going to just rob what's in the flat. They're going to probably torture them until they can find out where the main stash is and take the lot. So that was the sort of route that it was going down. And so we'd gone out on this job on the first day, and nothing happened, which is really common. Probably 80% of the jobs you go out on fizzle, and then you'll go out on another time, same job, and it'll come off. But so we got stood down, sort of quite late in probably about 9 o'clock in the evening, and we'd been on since 6 in the morning. And all we'd really done is sat in what we call gunships, which are our unmarked cars, 3 up, with all our weaponry. One of the cars will have method of entry kit in it, in case we have to go into a building. There'll be medical kits and everything else. By this point, we are a totally different body to what we were when I had my first shooting in '85. We were doing at the time somewhere in the region of 850 to 1,000 operations a year.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Jesus.
And that was between about 100 men.
Right.
And women.
Okay.
So we were split up into 6, not 100 men, what am I talking about? It's more like 60 actually. It's probably sort of 6 10-man teams, roughly.
Okay. Yeah.
So we were doing a lot of work, and there was a lot of experience.
That's a lot of graft over that 20 years, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it started off much less than that, but it progressed to that point. So anyway, we got stood down, and we got told, reparade at 6 o'clock. And this is on... So the first day was a Friday, the second day is going to be a Saturday. And because we'd had guys book leave for the weekends, when we came in the next day, rather than it just be grey team, which was my team, we had a splattering of guys from orange team, a splattering of guys from black team. That's not a problem, because that happens all the time. We're always short-handed, so you're always working with people from other teams. All of our training it runs parallel, so we all, in a 6-week cycle, we all do the same training team, the same instructors, so there's no one doing anything different, And so that we get briefed mainly for the benefit of the new guys, and we're off and running. And what we're told is that the previous evening, the bad guys had been trying to get guns together to do this robbery, but they kept making excuses to the victims, to the Colombians, saying, "All right, we're trying to get the money together." Eventually, the victims went, "Stuff it, leave it. We've got things to do. It's Friday night. I mean, we'll do it in the morning. Contact us in the morning." And so we got told that things had changed overnight. They obviously had facilities on these bad guys. Now, I don't know what those facilities were, but almost certainly their phones were tapped, so we could listen to conversation. But of course, they're talking in patois, so that conversation that's been listened to has to be interpreted. So they'll probably have some West Indian guy listening to it in a call centre somewhere, and then transmitting that information to their point of contact within the unit. So there's always a bit of a danger of information either getting misread or lost in translation, if you feel so. So you never treat it as 100%, but the more this job progressed, the more it looked like the intelligence was like A1. It was good. So we got told to make our way to southwest London to a police station. I think it was Fulham, and sit on standby there because we thought that there was going to be a meet between the robbers at a cafe after a certain time. So we all made our way to the Fulham police station, parked up in the yard. It was a nice spring day, last day of April, and we just chilled basically. You know, bit of banter, getting your head down. You know, a couple of guys would go around the corner and come back with some coffees, that sort of thing. It was pretty laid back. And then the radio started getting a bit busy. Yeah, we got subject 1 into the cafe. All right, okay. So it looked like it's, you know, starting to go the right direction. All right, you know, we've got subject 5 coming into the cafe now. Okay, so eventually we get a third subject. They get into this car, which was a hired VW Golf, and it was hired by Azelle Rodney using a forged driving licence. So it's got his features on it, it's got different names and everything else, and he's hired this car and it's overhired now. It should have been handed back in, but they're obviously using this to get around. So they then followed away by the surveillance team. Now what we do is we're not surveillance trained, we're surveillance aware. So you've got a degree of surveillance training, but we're not experts in surveillance. That's their job, the surveillance team's job. So, and we were using a radio called Cougar, which was a military encrypted radio. So now the bad guys can't listen to what we're saying, but it means that we have to keep within a certain range of the surveillance team in order to make sure we've still got good comms. Otherwise, people are going to be making phone calls and trying to get. So anyway, the subjects go to a known address that the team that are deploying us, which was a team within a secretive team within the flying squad, who dealt with contract killings and fast-moving jobs that almost certainly involved like somebody being killed, basically. So the surveillance team starts heading north towards, again, I want to say Kilburn, but it's not Kilburn. I can't think of the name of the place now. But it's a predominantly black area. And we're following at a discrete distance in a convoy order. So 3 unmarked high-performance saloon cars and probably like a Mercedes Sprinter, not Sprinter, but you know, one of the small vans, sort of thing you use as a taxi, and that'll have the team leader in it, one of our drivers, and the silver commander, the detective in charge of the operation on the ground. So what the information we're getting is that they're going to a meet in, I'll call it Kilburn, but it wasn't Kilburn, in Kilburn to collect the 3rd gun, and they've been heard talking on the radio, and they've said, we want 2 Big Macs and a little one. Now at the time, there's a submachine gun called a Mac-10 submachine gun, and it stands for Military Arms Corporation, and they were made in various places, but the main ones were made in Marietta, Georgia in the States, and they'd been around since the 60s. They've been used by the CIA in Vietnam, they've been used by UK Special Forces in Northern Ireland, and basically I describe it as a lead super soaker. It fires over 1,000 rounds a minute.
1,000?
Yeah.
In 60 seconds?
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the magazine only takes 30, but if your maths is good, you can work out quickly you're going to get through a 30-round magazine. So an Heckler & Koch MP5 fires 850 rounds a minute. So it's still fast, but it's much more controllable.
And you got 30 in each one, have you?
Each magazine,
Each magazine you got 30, unload, bang, 30.
And if you're inexperienced and you just grab hold of that trigger, it will just go. It's going to climb, and it's going to, it's pretty uncontrollable. Unless you know what you're doing and you fire in very short, like 2 or 3 round bursts, it is like pretty lethal. Now there was a load of these in circulation, and it was one of the main jobs in the Met at the time was trying to take these things off the street. And what it was is an underworld criminal armourer had bought about 100 of these things on the pretext that he was going to, from a legitimate arms source, that he needed them for a James Bond film, and they think they were blank firers. So he bought them as blank firers. So the barrel is blocked, and a lot of other things. And what he did is he converted them back so they were live fire, and they were getting used in contract killings and particularly drug-related contract killings a lot. And so any getting a Big Mac off the street was getting a Mac off the street was considered a thing. And that way we had 2 of them allegedly, and probably a handgun or a little one, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, we knew that they were going to Harlesden. They were going to go to Harlesden and get this 3rd gun. And sure enough, they pull up outside a West Indian club, private club, where there was a lot of activity out on the pavement, you know, and they were chatting to people, lots of, you know, hand slapping and all that sort of stuff. And then all 3 of them went off into a side street where they were met by a 3rd guy who gave them a bag, and then they went back to the car. That bag was put in the back of the car, and at that point they're still on the pavement talking, but we get the information they've got the 3rd gun. And at that point, the guy in the back seat puts on what was described as a 3/4 length coat, and we're like, well, why would you wear a 3/4 length coat on a hot day? Because a Mac-10 it's not like a pistol. It's, you know, sort of this big. You know, it's quite a bulky bit of kit, smallish but bulky. And then they're off and running, and so we're back in behind the surveillance team. When the surveillance team are doing their following bit, and we're just hanging back, that's called state green. Yeah. When it gets to a point where the Silver Commander decides that he has sufficiency of evidence to warrant stopping that vehicle and making arrests, we go to state amber. Okay. And at state amber, the surveillance team know that they need to start looking in their mirrors, because if they see us coming up, they need to pull over and let us, you know, leapfrog up to the front until we're in a position where we can take over the follow. Now, we're not surveillance officers, and we're not driving little discreet surveillance vehicles. We've got to have vehicles that are big enough to get 3 big blokes with body armour and all their weaponry and everything in. And, you know, we're all white, and we're in Harlesden. Or we're now heading towards Edgware. And most of the way between Harlesden and Edgware, there was no decent, fast stretches of road for us to get through the surveillance team. So it was only when we hit I'm guessing it would be in the A1, that the Silver Commander goes, right, stay amber. So at that point, we start getting through the surveillance team, and we get to Mill Hill Broadway, and we finally get up to the front and we declare state red. So that tells everybody on the operation the arrest is imminent, the hit is imminent. Yep. And it goes into a road, and they're heading towards a big roundabout, and if you turn left, you're going to Edgware, and they would have been to Edgware station within a matter of minutes. And we were basically told, right, you need to do this now, because if we lose them at this stage, which is possible, you know, you only got to get to a set of traffic lights, you know, and they get through on green and we're stuck on red, then, and these Colombian drug dealers get killed. We've got a duty of care to Colombian drug dealers. We can't let that happen. So the voice on the radio, which would be the guy in the lead vehicle, who's the convoy commander at this stage of the operation, goes, right, okay, attack, which is the words on the radio. So we're going to hit them before the roundabout if we get a chance. We're going to hit them at the roundabout if we get a chance. And then almost immediately it goes attack. And the Alpha vehicle, that's the lead vehicle, does an overtake to get in front. And the Bravo car, which I'm in, is going to, if everything ends up correctly, we're going to block them from the side, and I'm the front seat passenger. So my job is what we call static cover. Yeah. So if you think about it, you're probably not even aware of it, but when you get out of your car, even though you might have had your car for 2 years and you're absolutely familiar with it, and you know exactly where the door handle is, you look at the door handle. You probably don't even know that you do, but your eye glimpses down to the door handle. You could probably do it by feel in the dark, but you'll always kind of look, you know. When you open your door and you step out, nobody steps out into the dark. Everybody looks, even briefly, to make sure that you're not going to put your foot down a manhole cover, or, you know, treading some dog shit or whatever. And then you've got to put your plot cap on. Now, these are all little seconds where your attention isn't on the occupants of that vehicle. And then you've got to run round, and then you're going to bring your gun cover. So the concept is, it's cover and movement. It's a military basic premises of like infantry tactics, is that you only move when a section of your team are covering, and you leapfrog forward. That's kind of how you do it. So you work on exactly the same premise. The static cover guy in the front passenger seat just locks onto the occupants of the vehicle, guns up, ready to shoot if he needs be, and that allows the other guys to run and, you know, get themselves into position. And then as soon as you pretty well start hearing shouts of armed police, and you kind of have a little look and you see that other guys are on it, then you bug out and get out of the way. So That's the way that we do it. Now, on the Friday, I was driving the Bravo car.
Yeah.
And my mate Smudge, next para, is like front seat passenger. So if the job had happened the day before, he'd have been perhaps having to open fire. As it was, I'm the man in the hot seat now. So my perception was that it was pretty well a classic stop. The Alpha overtakes, slams on the brakes. The bad guys are concentrating their efforts on Alpha. Bravo pulls alongside and blocks them so they can't move out, and the Charlie car stuffs them up the arse so they can't back out of it. And then it's aggression, domination, and shouts of armed police. Smash the windows if you have to. If they start trying to, you can see the driver trying to get it in reverse. Blokes will take shotguns. There's one bloke in each car, and his sole job is to take out the tyres with breaching rounds from a sawn-off shotgun. Flashbangs maybe, but certainly you're going to smash the windows, and you're going to don't give them thinking time. Yeah. That's the premise of it. And to be honest, I thought that's kind of the way that it went, because I was just focused on that vehicle, and particularly as even before the hit went in, it come over the radio, the guy in the back seat is looking around. So I had it in my mind, I think, that we were potentially compromised here. The bloke in the back seat was like doing this, doing that, and then he looked like he was leaning forward, and my perception was that there was a bit of a heated conversation going on in the car, like, the old Bill's behind us, whatever. Yeah. So anyway, Azelle Rodney sitting in the back seat. It's quite a big unit. It's a relatively small car. It's only a Volkswagen Golf. And like I said, he looks around like this, he leans forward, and then suddenly he just ducks across the back seat, and I can't see him. And I think, fuck, he's going for a gun. So I bring up my carbine, and I'm locked on target, and just as quickly he sort of springs back up again, but I can't see his hands. His shoulders are hunched, but he's looking sort of out the other side of the car. His back's to me. I don't think he's even seen me. I don't think he was even aware that the Bravo car was alongside. And I thought, he's got a Mac 10. He's got a Mac 10, and he's going to open fire. But I can't see his hands. So it was probably the most difficult call I've ever had to make. If you've got a guy, I've said this before numerous occasions, but if you've got a guy using a 4-year-old child as a shield, and he's got a knife in his hand, that's not a difficult decision to make. If you've got 3 bad guys all wearing balaclavas and holding a security guard hostage at gunpoint, 2 sawn-off shotguns and a pistol, that's the simplest decision in the world. Yeah. People go, it must be so difficult to make a decision. It's not. Yeah. But when you can't see a gun, and you're going on the intelligence that you've been given and the suspect's body language, that's a big call to make. Yeah. But anyway, I decided I had to make it, so I fired a series of shots. And nothing happened, other than the window shattering and everything else. He seemed to just remain in that position. And I didn't think about this until afterwards, but if I'd have shot him out on the street, I'd have probably fired 2-3 rounds. If they were effective, he would have started to fall. And at that point, I would probably have stopped, or I might have fired a further round, because in the same time, action beats reaction. Yeah. And it takes you time to see what they're doing and make the decision to shoot. It also takes you time to realise that they're starting to fall and stop shooting. Yeah. So most people, when they shoot, they'll probably fire 1 or possibly 2 rounds more than they perhaps needed to, because the brain hasn't quite registered. So I fired a total of 8 rounds. And of course now I know that Azelle Rodney was not only sitting in the back seat of the car, so the back of his thighs, his arse and his back was supported by the car, but he also had a seatbelt on. And what I didn't realise is that my shots were having an effect, but he was just slumping towards me, and it was his body weight taking him down, and then suddenly when he got to about 45 degrees, he dropped. And at that point I thought, right, it's done, job done. So my car's quite close to his. I couldn't have opened the door with his car there, and although I can no longer see him, I don't know he's not still a threat. He might still have his hand on the Mac 10. So I do what we're trained to do, which is clamber across the front seats and come out through the driver's door. I went round in a circle. I come up behind the car, and I tried to look in through the back window, but I couldn't see anything. All I could see was black. So I smashed the rear window with the muzzle of my gun, and looked in, and I still couldn't see anything. To me, it was in darkness. What I later found out, it didn't occur to me, was that I would have never have seen him on the back seat anyway, because the rear parcel shelf on an old style Golf is about that deep. It's actually got quite a big boot. So looking into it, I would have never seen beyond it anyway. And what I thought was darkness was actually just the matte black what do you call it? You know, the lid,
Yeah.
the hatchback lid. So I then went round to the other side of the car. I noticed that a window was smashed on the other side of the car. And one of my mates from the Alpha car had come round and he was covering. So he gave me a nod. I opened the door, he covered in, and Rodney was lying across the back seat. And he reached in and he grabbed hold of him by the sort of scruff of his collar and pulled him into a vertical position. And at that point, his head sort of flopped like that, and I could see this massive, what looked like a exit gunshot wound to the top of his head. It looked like he'd been hit by an axe. I could see grey matter. I don't know, he's dead. And bits of brain matter came out onto my mate's trousers and stuff like that. And my mate looked at me. I can't remember any words being said, but I'd worked with this guy for 10 years, you know, or longer. And we kind of didn't need to say anything. He kind of looked at me as if to say, "Is this you? Is this your work?" sort of thing. And I went, "Yeah." And he went, "Oh, fuck off. You don't need to be here."
What was that feeling like afterwards on this shooting compared to the others? What was going through your mind? Do you think there was going to be huge knock-on effects from this? When did it occur to you that you were going to end up in a 10-year court case and being trying to get done for murder?
It didn't really occur to me until a couple of years after the incident. So within a few months, within about, so let me take you through the pace. So by this time, the whole post-incident procedure has changed. They're not going to go and issue you a new revolver the next day and say, "Go back to work."
Yeah.
Now you're going to be suspended for at least a couple of months at this point. That's what I'm thinking. The IOPC was a rebrand from whatever it was called before. And there'd been lots of problems with the original format. And so there'd been lots of discussions between the police service in the UK and this new body to make sure that some of those issues would be resolved. And one of the issues was how long police officers were being suspended for. It just wasn't considered fair, you know. And so the original decision was, what we will do is we will come back to you within, I think it was 3 weeks of an incident, and we will tell you that we will give you an update. And, you know, if we need longer, we'll tell you how long that's going to be, and when we get to that point, you know, and so on and so forth. But we will update you on a regular basis. But if after, I think it was a month, if after a month we have seen nothing to indicate that the officer acted unlawfully, then it'll be up to you as a police service as to whether you reinstate him. Okay. So 4 weeks later, I'm still suspended. In the meantime, we've had the 2005 London bombings. Yeah. And we've had 7/7, and then we had 21/7, where the bombs failed to go off, and where John Charles de Menezes was killed. Yeah. So there's now me.
Was that Stockwell Tube Station? Was it back then?
Yeah. So there's now me and the two guys that are involved in that. All of us are good friends. You know, there's like I said, there's only about 60 of us on the top floor, so on the third floor. So we know each other, we get on well with each other, and we're all in the sin bin, for want of a better word. Yeah. You know, we're all suspended and all being investigated. I'd been recruited because I was literally due to retire on the 11th of August 2005, but because on the last day of April I'd been involved in this shooting, I'm suspended. Special Forces came down to London after the bombers went off in 7/7, and then they came back down in 21/7, and on both occasions because I was suspended, they went, "Right, you're the liaison guy for them." So I'd been embedded with them for the period that they were down. There was other jobs, you know, sort of support jobs that I could do, you know, working on projects and things like that. So I wasn't that concerned about it. But I'd been recruited to work for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office doing protection duties for government employees in places like Afghanistan and things like that. And I was looking forward to going and doing the selection course for that. I was sent away by the FCO to the States to do this selection course, which was about 7 weeks. I did that. I came back, which would have been about sort of late September, and I think it was November. The IPCC came back and said, "We believe that Echo 7." All of my statements and all of the team statements, we all had an Echo call sign, and I was Echo 7. So I wasn't. So basically, the IPCC statement read something to the effect of, "We're satisfied that Echo 7 acted in accordance with the law and in accordance with his training, and he fired no more rounds than were required in the circumstances." So that green card. So I got put back on ops So I was back on the team, back on grey team, going out and doing day-to-day jobs and things like that. But the IPCC had submitted the papers to the Crown Prosecution Service for them to make a decision. So the IPCC had done 6 months, decided I'd acted lawfully. Then the Crown Prosecution Service looked at it for another 6 months.
Why did they look at it? Surely the IPCC said, right, it's out, closed book. Why did it then go to that next level?
I think because they wanted, you know, the CPS are lawyers, aren't they? So they from their perspective, as investigators, they couldn't see that I'd done anything wrong, but they wanted the Crown Prosecution Service to give it the seal of approval, basically. And the Crown Prosecution gave it to a silk to look at, and a silk is like the highest rank, if you like, within sort of the system of barristers. He'd looked at it and he decided I'd acted lawfully, and that's why they gave the result they did. So basically almost a year to the day after the shooting, I got the all clear that I wasn't going to get prosecuted.
And what was that like for you? Did you have the fear that you were going to get prosecuted?
No,
the fear of going to jail?
I was always 100% certain that I'd acted lawfully and in accordance with my training. Never even occurred to me that there would be an issue. What I didn't know was that it was being filmed. It was being filmed by one of the team guys in the Delta car from another team, from Black Team. Good mate. But he'd filmed it for training purposes. Obviously not thinking it was going to end up in a shooting. But what he's done is, you know, what the police service does in this day and age. You know, back in the 70s, they might have gone, been that, we want to see that. But
and the 80s and the 90s and the 90s and the 10s.
But he declared it, and he went straight to the team leader and said to them, look, you need to know I filmed this. So the team leader said, right, well, now you've declared it, film the scene. You know. So not only did he film the incident, but he filmed all of the aftermath of the scene. He filmed the first aid that was going on. He filmed the recovery of the gun from the back seat. He filmed the suspects being searched and led away and all that sort of stuff. So it's a valuable document of what happened, and he handed it in. I'd never seen it. I didn't see it. I didn't see it until 5 years after the incident. So by which time I've written my statement and all the rest of it. So when I eventually got to look at this video 5 years later, I was like, that's not exactly how I recall it. It turned out not to have been a perfect intervention at all. It turned out that as our car, the Bravo, the Alpha car did the overtake, Smudge went for an overtake and then came nose to nose with a car coming in the opposite direction, swerved to avoid the other car, and my quarter of the car actually hit the Bandit car. No recollection of that at all. I was so focused on the back seat passenger. And then what happened is the Alpha car, that caused the Bravo, that caused the subject to start braking early. So the Alpha car is too far ahead. And everything stopped and froze for a couple of seconds while everyone, what's happening here? So then the Bandit car starts to drive forward, and the Bravo car starts to drive forward and eventually puts the block in. And the Charlie car, realising that there's too much of a gap at the front, rams the back of the subject vehicle. So the Bravo car then has to move forward. It wasn't, my recollection was, I mean, it was correct to a certain degree, but I didn't know anything. I didn't even know that we'd had a contact with the vehicle. I certainly didn't know anything about the vehicle coming towards us. When you watch the film, you almost went, whoa. It was so
what were the press calling you at that time? What were the names they were using?
They weren't calling me anything because although they knew it was me, they were required by law to refer to me as Echo 7.
Okay.
So what happened was I started to know things were going to go wrong about a year or so after the incident.
So we're 2006 now.
Yeah, it would have been
Roughly.
about 2006. Okay. There had been a shooting. The teams had been involved in a shooting on an anti-terrorist job, and the IPCC were in the building, along with a woman called Sue Akers, who was the commander in charge of professional standards, so like internal affairs, to use an American expression. So I wanted to speak to both of them because I knew that the IPCC guy was the guy that was in charge of my case. I still hadn't got the all clear from the CPS at this point, and I knew that Sue Akers, as head of internal affairs, might also have some insight into how long it was going to be before the Crown Prosecution Service gave me the all clear, because I was waiting to go work for the Foreign Office. So I spoke to the IPCC bloke, and he said, Tony, I'm glad you're here. He said, I'll give you a little update. And he took me into a corner and said, there's going to be a problem, he goes, because your statements are so heavily redacted, because it transpired that the vast majority of the intelligence we were being given had come from a technical source. almost certainly phone taps,
Yeah.
but I don't know that. And if I did know and I told you, I'd be breaking the law under a thing called RIPA, which stands for the Regulation of Investigative Powers Act. So any reference in the statement to things that we could only have known by phone tap had been crossed out of our statements. We didn't cross them out. Somebody like within the investigation team had been given the job of redacting these statements. So what happened is any fatality, particularly in these circumstances, will have to go to a coroner's court. So it went to the coroner's court, and the coroner took one look at the statements and said, I can't put this in front of a jury because the jury aren't going to understand why the police officer shot the suspect, because all of his justification for doing so is redacted. And not even me, under RIPA, even the coroner couldn't look at it.
Yeah.
So that left everyone in a bit of a quandary, including the government. So the Labour government, I think it was the Labour government at the time, it was Blair government, they lost out to the Tory Liberal thing, didn't they? So they were always like, I don't know what to do with this. This job is going to bite us because we don't. So eventually they had to change the law. So I knew then, in 2006, it was going to present a problem. And it wasn't until they created this new bit of legislation which allowed a senior High Court judge to sit in the absence of a jury, listen to all the evidence, and make a decision as to whether or not I acted lawfully or not. And that didn't happen until 7 years after the incident.
Were you suspended that whole of that time?
No, because I retired. So basically, I should have retired in 2005. Because I didn't know what was going to happen, I lost the job with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. I stayed on the teams for another 3 years. So I didn't retire until 2008. Then I worked in the commercial world. So I left in 2008. I think it was about 2013, 2014. I gave evidence at this public inquiry.
So 9 years later, you gave evidence.
Yeah, and then the trial was 10 years later.
My God.
Because what happened was that a 72-year-old retired High Court judge, clearly quite a liberal person in his background, not a criminal lawyer by his career was in the civil courts, and he listened to all the evidence and decided that while I had an honestly held belief that Azelle Rodney might have been armed, it was unlawful of me to shoot him. And certainly to have shot him as many times as I did. And he decided, and he did say in the report, that that was based on a measure based on civil law as opposed to criminal law, which is more lax. Civil law, you are allowed to give opinion, you're allowed to give hearsay evidence, all things that you can't do in a criminal court. But he said, based on that level of evidence, he thought I'd acted unlawfully. And so, but that was his only, that was the end of it as far as he was concerned. But his inquiry was set up 2 years before we even gave evidence. So for 2 years, him, another barrister, and some solicitors, and some technical experts from Northern Ireland, retired police officers from Northern Ireland, had basically decided that I'd acted unlawfully before we even got to give our evidence. They'd done reconstructions. They'd basically been playing Miss Marple for 2 years. So by the time we came to give our evidence, I'm pretty sure that he went, well, that doesn't correlate with what I think happened. And so in his eyes, I was guilty. So it then had to go back to the Crown Prosecution Service, and the Crown Prosecution Service went, we looked at this in 2006, and we thought he acted lawfully. And a silk decided he'd acted lawfully. But now we've got a judge who's had a public inquiry, who's listened to all the evidence, and he's decided that Echo 7 acted unlawfully. What are we going to do? And I think they just went, let a jury decide.
Right.
So,
were you still confident at that time when you thought, I'll just let the jury decide?
Well, no, it's interesting.
There's 12 random people there.
It's interesting. So throughout the public inquiry thing, the Police Federation, which is like our union, had got me a solicitor and got me a barrister, and they represented me in the public inquiry. And I was in the box giving evidence at the public inquiry for a whole day. And
was Azelle Rodney's family all there?
His mother was, together with one of her friends. No one else was allowed in. It was filmed, so it was live feed to another room where the press and everyone else could sit in, but that live feed didn't show the witness box, so you could hear what I was saying, but the members of the public wouldn't be able to see me because the whole team had anonymity.
So this whole 8 years, no one knew what you looked like?
No one knew what I looked like. In fact, the press didn't even know what I looked like, because what they'd done is they based their who they thought I was from a photograph on the balcony of that siege at Northolt, and they'd actually put a circle around the wrong bloke.
Right, okay.
But it's interesting. I'd had press interest. At one point, I went on a murder inquiry in the Caribbean, and the chief crime correspondent from the Daily Mail or the Sunday Mail, and a photographer came out to spend a week with us on this Caribbean island, St Kitts, because this investigation was like, it was quite a sexy investigation. It was like the sort of thing you'd make a film out of. And we were out there doing a protective role, but we were also acting as like sort of junior detectives, taking statements and all this sort of stuff. And these press guys, I mean, it's a small island. There weren't many Europeans around, and they lavished us with drinks and food. We never put a hand in our pockets for 2 weeks, you know. And but he called me Tony every day, and I called him by his first name. And then I gave him and the photographer a lift to the airport. The detective in charge said, "Tony, you're spared today. Can you take them to the airport?" So I took him to the airport. He said, "Thanks very much, Tony." He shook my hand, and I left them. I went back to the base, and I'm sitting in the murder inquiry office, and the phone rings. So I picked the phone up, and I said, "Murder inquiry, PC Long speaking." And the voice on the other end went, "Gotcha." And I said, "Sorry, who's this?" And he said, "Oh, it's so-and-so." There was the press guy who's ringing from the airport. He said, "I didn't realise you were Tony Long. I'm going to come back and interview you." And I went, "You can fuck off." And I put the phone down there. You can do one. So the press knew who I was. And because I'd been involved in these two, what had been, by the times, very high-profile incidents, you know, they knew who I was. I mean, someone obviously told them, you know, who I was. The Echo 7 was actually Tony Long.
What sort of ripple effects happened around London at this time? A shooting of the young Azelle Rodney.
Well, so I think what really screwed me was in 2000. I shot Azelle Rodney in 2008, and I had the good fortune or common sense or whatever to shoot dead a young black criminal in a predominantly middle-class Jewish neighbourhood. So, in all honesty, no one gave a fuck. No one had heard of Azelle Rodney. His name didn't even register. You know, yes, there was a report, you know, when he was named, that a young man, blah, blah, blah. But no one, it didn't get beyond the 5th page of the newspaper. But then what we had was the shooting of the young black man in Hackney, which caused all the riots in, 2011, just before the Olympics, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What was his name? I should really know his name.
They were huge riots.
Yeah, huge.
I was living in Brixton at the time, and it was kicking off everywhere.
Well, it kicked off all over the country, didn't it? There was riots in Manchester.
But
I mean, a police helicopter was shot at in Manchester. Oh my God, I can't think of his name. I'm having a blank spot. Anyway.
Mark Duggan.
So consequently, while my shooting caused no ripples whatsoever, as soon as the Mark Duggan incident happened, and the press went, "Well, who else are the police shot?" and everything else, Azelle Rodney sort of got lumped in with the whole Duggan thing. And the public inquiry into my shooting was taking place when the Duggan inquiry happened.
Right.
And so I'm pretty certain that coloured everything in relation to my one. And I think that's probably why the CPS, when they looked at it the second time, decided that they were going to put it in front of a jury. So, yeah.
Were you confident going in on that day that the jury weren't going to send you down for murder?
So, well, it's interesting because between my shooting, in fact, it was just before I decided to retire. I'd been offered a job in the commercial world, and I went home from work having told them, right, that's it, I've been given a job offer, I'm leaving the job. and I found an official-looking envelope on my doorstep, and it was jury service at Croydon Crown Court. I was still a serving police officer, but I thought, well, that'd be interesting. I'll go and do jury service. Oh my God! Have you ever done jury service?
No, but I've heard.
What a revelation!
Yeah.
I'd have never done anything contentious as picked up a gun if you knew how a jury operated. You know, they were literally finding people guilty or not guilty based on what day of the week it was. Yeah. Well, it's Thursday. Like, you know, half of us finding him guilty, and half of us think he's not guilty. Well, if we just make a decision today, that'll give us Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. That'll give us a long weekend. Right. Like, really?
Right, okay.
You know, there's someone's liberty at stake here. So I wasn't overly confident. In fact, when they told me it was going to be a judge sitting without a jury, I thought, thank fuck for that. Yeah. You know, an intelligent man like a judge. But as I was giving my evidence, like I said, I was in the witness box all day, and I had a barrister and I had a lawyer, a solicitor with me. And I had a particularly hostile barrister representing the family. It wasn't an easy thing, but I knew that I'd performed well, for want of a better word. Yeah. And the reason I knew that is because, you know, I was my own expert witness. I'd been a police firearms instructor since 1983. You know, I knew the law on the use of force inside out. I knew what our policy was on shooting and you know, post-incident procedure and everything else. And I was quite satisfied that I'd answered all the questions in exactly the right way. But I could just tell by the judge's body language and the questions he was asking me that he hadn't got it. Yeah. And we went out the back of the court when obviously they had the court set up as I already described, but there was a police area where you could get smuggled out of the court without the press catching you outside the building. And I went out to that area there, and there were coppers on the protection team and other witnesses, and they're all like, "Fucking hell, Tony, brilliant! That was evidence was spot on." You know, I was like, "Okay, cheers, thanks." You know, and then my barrister came out with the solicitor, and the barrister said, "Tony, that is the most professional witness evidence we've ever heard from a police firearms officer." And the solicitor said, "We had high expectations, Tony, and you smashed it." And I went, "He didn't get it." And I went, "What do you mean you didn't get it?" I went, "The judge didn't get it." "Oh, no, he was silly." "Yeah, of course he did." I said, "I'm telling you now, he didn't get it." Anyway, they took me off for a very nice lunch, or dinner by that time. And still during dinner, I'm insistent. You know, and then, no, Tony.
Well, you just got that gut feeling.
Yeah, you're digging yourself out. You don't know, he definitely, you know. Anyway, like a year or so later, whenever it was that he announced his findings, I had to go to the barrister's chambers with my solicitor, and she said, "You were absolutely 100% right." So when they made the decision to charge me and put it before a jury, I'd kind of changed my mind. I was like thinking to myself, do you know what? Even a jury made up of butchers, bakers and candlestick makers and housewives and God knows what else, you know, this isn't just a minor assault in a nightclub in Croydon they're listening to. This is like, you know, it's a murder trial. You know, it's not one person's opinion. It's 12 people's opinion. And I think I'd rather put my hands in, you know, bear in mind, I've said this, I think I put it in the book, you know, that for the whole of my service, you know, the public had put faith in me and, you know, put their lives in my hand. And now I was going to have to do the same. You know, I was going to have to sit there and let them listen to the evidence and let them make a decision about whether I'd acted correctly or not. And I thought, you know what? I think the vast majority of the public are going to go, well, fuck Azelle Rodney. You know, he knew what the score was. He had 3 guns in the vehicle with him and his 2 mates, and they were off to rob someone. You know, unfortunately, that's. And
your duty was to protect.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and protect my colleagues, protect the public. Protect the drug dealers. Yeah. You know. So, yeah, but being charged was definitely, and the trial itself was, you know, I was confident, reasonably confident.
You still had that little man on your shoulder going, hold on, what happens if not? What was that feeling what you were talking about going, if I do get banged up, you're going to be seen as a copper in a naughty prison.
Yeah. There's going to be 3 monkeys on mopeds using my arsehole as the ring of death.
Mate, you ain't going to last long in there. No. Did that go through your mind?
Yeah, it did. It came home to me a little bit when the very first court appearance I had, when they charged me. Well, they didn't charge me, but when they read out the charges to me.
What were the charges?
Murder.
Just pure murder.
Just pure murder. Okay. They tried when it got to the Old Bailey to offer up an option of manslaughter. I went, no, fuck off. Yeah. You know, no, I'm not giving the jury a, well, all right, well, let's not find him guilty of murder, let's find him guilty of manslaughter. But yeah, when I first stood up in the was it, Westminster Magistrates Court. The plan was that my old unit, bearing in mind I've been out of the job for quite some time now, they'd worked out a plan to smuggle me into the building. So they'd spoken to Serco, which is the civilian company that runs the courts in London. It used to be a police thing, it wouldn't have been a problem back in the 80s or the 90s, because the court, all the security in the court was police officers. Yeah. So you would have gone to the court inspector and gone, right, we need to get this police officer in covertly and get him out covertly. Well, Serco agreed to it, but then when we pulled up at the back gates in a covert vehicle, they went, you ain't coming in here. No, there's nothing, we don't know anything about it. So I was seen by everybody in the court. I was in a box, was handcuffed to a guard, well, not handcuffed to a guard, but handcuffed. Then taken out in handcuffs, taken down to the cells. And so the team went down, they went, right, we're taking him to the Old Bailey because he's got to be seen before a judge, because only a judge can grant bail for murder. Yeah. And he went, he's our little puppy now, we transport him to prison, to the Old Bailey. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure they deliberately dragged their heels, because there was a little window of opportunity where this judge was prepared to see me and grant me bail. Yeah. And they just kept putting it back, putting it back. And eventually I got put on the prison van, and I've got all the photographers running up alongside, trying to take pictures through the window, all this.
What was going through your head at that moment?
Mate, I was threaders. I was like, what the fuck is going on here? And I don't know how I felt. I was like, it was really bizarre. It's like, any criminal that's been in a similar position will probably tell you the same story. But you're used to living outside, and I remember it was a bright sunny day, and everyone was out. It was lunchtime. It was like everyone was out on the pavement and enjoying their sandwiches, sitting on a bench, and people going past on bicycles. And there's me in a suit, crammed into this little box at the back.
Cuffed up.
Well, I wasn't cuffed up in the truck, but I'm thinking, fucking hell. What I didn't know was that the team were following. And every time the security van driver, the Serco driver, was trying to lose them at lights. So he'd pull up at the lights, he'd wait till the lights were about to change and then go. But they were just putting the blue lights on, and they stuck with him all the way to the Old Bailey. And the entrance to the Old Bailey, like the vehicle entrance, is a big gate. But you then go down a ramp, a curly ramp, and you get to the bottom, and it's one of those, there's not much space down there at all, but there's one of those big wheels that you park the truck on, and you literally manhandle it around. So when we get down the bottom there, I can hear as we're going down the ramp, the female custodian in the back of the truck is saying to the driver, who the fuck do they think they are? They've followed us down here. And when I tell you they think they are, they think they're the fucking police. That's who they think they are. So when I got taken out the back of the truck in handcuffs, it was basically like four guys from the SO19, nose to nose with four Serco blokes going, we're fucking coming in. Yeah. And in the end, there was this big row in the lobby, the prisoner entry area. And the team leader, the SO19 team leader, said, right, I ain't leaving him. Well, they're going, well, you got to. We're going to put him in a cell. And he said, well, then I'll go in the fucking cell with him. He said, well, you can't take your phone. So he literally took his phone out of his pocket, fucking hurled it at the Serco guy. And he ended up sitting in the cell with me for about an hour. And we kind of giggled like school kids. It was just so bizarre. And then when it was all over, I was granted bail. And they took me back to the operational base where there was a load of beer. In fact, there were some beers. Someone had gone out and got a crate of beers. We were a bit warm, but there were some cold beers back at the base. But the interesting thing was that the judge at the back, the court was pretty well empty, except the back row where the punters sit in the court was made up of about 12 members of the press. And the judge was sort of commenting on various things came up, my bail, but my anonymity came up because once I was charged, I would lose that anonymity. But the anonymity had been granted me by the Home Secretary. Yeah. So it was going to have to be the Home Secretary that took that anonymity away. But he then turns to the press and he goes, members of the press, are you represented today? And they kind of looked at each other, and some woman from the BBC stands up and says, no, we're not represented, but I'll speak for us all. We think he should have his anonymity taken away from him because we want to report on it today. And I'm thinking, why is the judge asking the press? Yeah. And my concern was I was going to lose my anonymity. The press were on to me, and I'm thinking, I need to keep my address secret because otherwise I'm going to get the press parked up on me. And,
not only the press, maybe
exactly.
friends and family members coming after you. Absolutely. I mean, that's the bit I'm trying to get to. I'm thinking, hold on a minute.
That's my biggest concern, but obviously the press are going to lead them too.
But my biggest concern, hold on a minute, the mum's clocked you up. The press are just going to come out of here. All his mates, it's been 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and you've been under the radar. All of a sudden, you're on top of the radar. Potentially could get banged up.
You know, and had I been allowed to, it's interesting. So
what would they have given you? What would they have given you for murder?
Life. There's no option.
But live, what, 25?
Yeah, life.
And how old were you at the time?
I was born in 57, and the trial was in 2015. So your maths is probably better than mine. I was probably 50.
How old are you today?
I'm 66 now.
66. Okay, minus 8. Okay, you were 50, 57, 58, roughly around that age, and you're going to get 20. Jesus.
Yeah. Interesting.
Do you ever have the fear of anyone at that time coming after you and trying to get revenge and what have you, or do you think it had been so long of anonymity that it's sort of under the carpet?
I've lived at 5 addresses since my first shooting in 1985, and the Met Police have provided security since the second one, so 1987. So I've had direct panic alarms to 999, written response plans to my address, CCTV cameras, live feed on my address for most of a good percentage of my service. Part of me, my wife's quite shrewd, but we're not going to let it sort of ruin our lives. I live my life perfectly normally, but you just have to be a bit more alert. Yes, I think to myself, not so much, because I have had people trying to track me down. There was one guy who was a private investigator, but he turned out he was just a bit of a nutter. But he'd had an issue with police shootings since the 1960s, and he just basically would turn up on the doorstep of a family whose loved one had been shot by the police, and gone, right, I'm going to work for you for nothing, and he'd find out where the police officers were living, all this. And I had this guy turn up at New Scotland Yard, saying that he wanted me and the officer in charge of the abattoir case to be produced at New Scotland Yard on date, time and place, so that he could carry out a citizen's arrest. I mean, the problem was he was written off as a bit of a nutter, but I'm thinking to myself, well, there's the nutters you need to be concerned about,
of course,
because I don't know, it's like, it's a long time ago, and I'd like to think that the families have gone, well, our lad was a wrong 'un, he was doing robberies, is it really in our interests to
have you ever seen
officer?
The mum, apart from that day in court?
Azelle Rodney's mum? Yeah, so she was at court every day with all her sons in the Old Bailey, and I have to say that she acted impeccably. She's actually quite a well-spoken woman, and her basic take on it was, I accept that my son was, for a long period of time, she wouldn't accept that her son was a wrong 'un. Absolutely wouldn't. Because the 2 guys in the car with him, they were given bird for conspiracy to commit unlawful possession of firearms and conspiracy to rob. And they only did about 6 years, and they were out. And of course, she was really bitter about that, because she didn't know any of the storyline, and because of all of these issues around Ripper and all the evidence being inadmissible, no one would turn around and tell her, look, this is what happened. At one point, I'll be perfectly honest, I started doing a bit of detective work. So I'm out of the job now, I'm a civilian, I'm working in, like I said, in the private sector. And I actually found her mobile number out, because she was, I think her son was a talented footballer, or had been before he got some injury or something. And he'd played for a certain club, and I can't remember quite what the connection was, but I think she wanted to do a trophy in his memory or something for the club to play, but it was something like that. I probably got that wrong, but she said, if anybody knew Azelle, you can contact me on this number. And I seriously thought about ringing her up, with a dodgy Geordie accent or something, and saying, look, you need to know what happened that day, because I'm a parent, my son's in the military, if he he's done some seriously dangerous shit in his service. But if the old Bill shot him, say he was having a bit of a mental health crisis or something, I'd absolutely want to know why. I'd like to think that once I'd heard the evidence, I'd go, right, okay, well, they didn't have any option, you know. But she didn't know any of that. And so, you know, she was like speaking out about her son and how he was just an innocent, and he was in a car and he didn't have a gun, he didn't do this, he didn't do that. And it was all total bollocks. He was up to his ears in it. But when I was charged, so when I was not found guilty, but when the judge at the inquiry decided I'd acted unlawfully, she was like, happy days. Yeah. That's all I wanted. Yeah. He acted unlawfully, da-da-da. So, of course, then when I got charged, she was equally happy. And then when she went to court, I'm fairly certain that she thought I was going to get convicted. But her and her 3 sons, were, you know, big lads, they also, bizarrely, the Old Bailey is designed for serious criminal cases. And the vast majority of serious criminal cases, the person is brought to court in a prison van from prison because they're on remand. Because I've been very unusually granted bail because I was a police officer and the circumstances were totally different, the court isn't designed for the actual defendant to get into the box from the civilian side. So when we had a break, when the judge went out or whatever, you know, I'd be going outside and I'd be talking to my barristers, and on the other side of the lobby, she'd be there talking to her barristers. And they positioned her and her family right next to the steps for me to get back in the box. So I'd have to come back in and I'd have to, excuse me. And they always just stepped out of the way. No one said anything or anything else. She lost it a bit at one point during, she lost it during the public inquiry. I actually became quite tearful in the public inquiry when I was giving my evidence, and I wasn't expecting it at all. It just came out of the blue. And because I've never shed a tear over anything like this before, I was giving my evidence and I was describing how we pulled Azelle Rodney up into the upright position and I saw the gunshot wound. And I burst into tears or anything, but there was a bit of a quiver in my voice and I had to stop for a second. And she obviously thought I was putting it on because she shouted something. I didn't hear what she shouted, and she stormed out of the court. And there was another occasion at the Old Bailey where the prosecution made a point or something like that, and she shouted something out. I think it was during the judge's summing up, actually. The judge was summing up, and she thought something he'd said wasn't fair or something, so she said something, and I think she was ushered out of the court quietly, not kicked out, but, you know, you need to leave sort of thing. So, yeah, the interesting thing is obviously my life was turned upside down in my eyes because, you know, and this was an anger I felt at the scene. We didn't talk about this earlier, but when I was sitting at the scene and I'm looking at everything that's happening in front of me from the back of that control ship, as the time went on, you know, Azelle Rodney, the ambulance turned up. He was basically declared dead, and a red ambulance blanket was put over him, and I was just angry, you know.
Angry at yourself, or angry at the situation, or
angry at him?
Okay.
You know, here I am, literally yards away from the finishing line, 30 years in the police, got a good job to go to, and you selfish git, you know, you've taken the shortcut to riches by going and rob a Colombian drug dealer, and you forced me into a position where I've had to shoot you. And now I just know that my world is going to be on hold. Yeah. I didn't think it was going to be on hold for as long as it was. But yeah, so I was...
How many years was your life on hold for?
Well, I say life on hold. I mean, that was my perception at the time. But
knowing that's on the back of your mind, that you've got this case coming up. How many years in total?
Well, it was 10 years.
Wow.
It was 10 years.
And how did that affect you personally? Your relationship with your missus, your relationship with your kids?
I split up with a girl that I was in a relationship I was living with, but I can't really blame that on Azelle Rodney, to be honest. It was, you know...
Would you ever have a conversation with Azelle Rodney's mum?
Yeah, under the right circumstances, yeah. Whether she'd want to, I don't know.
What would you say if you saw her?
Well, I wouldn't apologise. I'd apologise for her, you know, her loss. Yeah. But I wouldn't apologise for doing what I had to do. Yeah. You know, to my mind, it's like, you know, you made the decision that you weren't going to go and get a decent job and earn your living the hard way. You were going to be a crim, and you were going to go out and rip off other drug dealers. Yeah. You know, you would have been quite happy to murder them. Yeah. You know, that would be, I think, my attitude on it. Probably wouldn't be quite as brutal if I was speaking to... Yeah. Touching back on what we were just talking about there, and anonymity and everything. I lost my anonymity as soon as I got charged. The day I got, well, not the day I got charged, basically the decision was made that I was going to lose my anonymity. It took a week or so because the Home Office had to get involved to take that away from me. But essentially, as soon as it looked like I was going to get charged, I lost my anonymity. And from that point on, social media, the press, so much has been written about me that was total bollocks, that I thought, well, the cat's out of the bag now. Had you allowed me to keep my anonymity, and we've got child sex offenders that have been grooming people in the north of this country who are allowed to keep their anonymity right the way through.
That pisses me right
the way through the end of the trial, and yet I can't for doing what I was trained to do and what I was expected to do. So as soon as I lost my anonymity, as far as I was concerned, that was gloves off.
Yeah.
If I'd been allowed to keep my anonymity and it had gone through the courts and I'd been acquitted, I would have never, ever written my book.
Okay. But you just wanted to get your voice out there and tell the story.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
I'll tell you, here's a classic example.
Yeah.
So Azelle Rodney's been shot. I'm in my previous relationship, and as I said, it was a bit rocky. And we both decided that we were going to take a break, book into a nice hotel in Chichester for the weekend, and we were going to talk about things and go for walks and try and remedy what was wrong. And we literally just sat down. We'd driven down in the afternoon. We sat down in the dining room, and my phone goes off. And she looks at me, and I went, I'm going to have to answer this. And I went out, and it was the post-incident office where I was based. And I went, Tone, you need to know that News of the World are going to write an article about you.
Oh, mate.
I said, well, they can't. I've got anonymity, but they think they can get around that.
Did your heart sink at that moment?
So I was like, oh, for fuck's sake. I said, all right, okay. I said, what's happening? And they said, right, you're going to get a phone call from a barrister or a lawyer at the Met Police Federation Lawyers. Are you happy to take the phone call? I said, yeah, fine. So I went back, I sat down. 30 seconds later, I have to take his call.
Yeah.
Went outside. And he goes, right, okay, Tony, they can't write about you. He said, but they want to use your nickname. I said, right, what nickname are they going to use? They're going to call you the Met's very own serial killer. So I had various nicknames that I've been given over there. The Equaliser, the Met's own serial killer. There was loads of nonsense
Police
stuff.
hitman.
All that sort of crap.
Yeah.
So they said, they're going to call you something. Are you happy for him to be called Tony? Just use the name Tony. And I went, yeah, go on then. I was pretty worn down by this point. So the next morning, got up, went down to the newsagents, bought the News of the World, went home, put a coffee on, opened the News of the World. I am known as Dirty Tony. And it's literally got, the officer known in the dark humour of his colleagues from the specialist firearms teams as Dirty Tony. I was like, oh, fuck's sake. So I'd had all of this, and that's why I wrote the book.
What's the name of the book?
It's called Lethal Force.
And where can people find that?
You can find it on Amazon. Occasionally, I went off to Greece about 4 weeks ago, and I saw it in Gatwick, in WH Smith's. But the book came out in 2016. Yeah. It came out at the same time as a Channel 4 documentary. The two things were linked, so it came out basically covering my career in the firearms unit, and that was called Secrets of a Police Marksman. And as far as I'm aware, it's still on YouTube, I think. Yeah. So there's if you tap in Tony Long on YouTube, you'll see various stuff come up. Yeah.
Tony, I've really enjoyed this episode.
Good.
Thank you for your honesty.
My pleasure.
It's really nice to hear your whole 30-year career, and that last story you just told us there about Mr. Rodney is a powerful story for many, many reasons. And I really appreciate you coming down here.
No, my pleasure.
Yeah, you're a gentleman.
Thank you.
Good man. Cheers, Tony.